In October 1347, 12 Genoese galleys limped into the port of Messina, Sicily. Most of the crew were already dead. Those still clinging to life were covered in painful black swellings that oozed blood and pus. Over the next 5 years, the disease spread across the continent, killing an estimated 25 to 50 million people. This was a cataclysmic system shock. The scale of loss meant every social and economic pillar of the 14th century was about to be tested. To understand the impact, we have to look at how Europe functioned. In the 14th century, labor was incredibly cheap, and generations of peasants were tied by law to the land they farmed. The church sat at the top of this hierarchy, holding absolute authority over everything from daily law to the era's limited medical knowledge. This raises a central tension. How does a society built on such unyielding, rigid rules respond when its most powerful institutions are rendered ineffective against an invisible threat? Genetic evidence traces the origin of the pathogen back thousands of years to the steppes of Central Asia, where it circulated among hunter-gatherers near Lake Baikal. As trade expanded, the Silk Road inadvertently became a highway for the disease, carrying it through China, India, and Persia. In 1346, during the siege of Kaffa, the plague became a weapon. Infected corpses were reportedly lobbed over city walls, forcing fleeing traders to carry the infection into the Mediterranean. The specific microscopic culprit was a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, which traveled in the guts of fleas living on black rats. The disease took 3 forms. Bubonic attacked lymph nodes, septicemic infected the blood, and pneumonic settled in the lungs. This airborne pneumonic strain, passed person to person through coughs, was the primary engine of the pandemic. Together, these 3 strains were biologically efficient enough to bypass every natural and man-made defense in the medieval world. In many of these cities, the mortality rates exceeded 50%. Without a scientific anchor to explain the devastation, the terror of the plague drove many to turn that destructive energy inward on their own communities. By 1353, the first massive wave of the disease had burned out, leaving a continent with significantly fewer people to work the land. The physical evidence remains in mass graves across Europe, where victims were interred in communal trenches to keep pace with the death toll. For those who survived, the sudden lack of people created a new, unprecedented economic leverage. This chart shows the result of that labor shortage. Landowners were forced to pay significantly higher wages to secure workers, effectively breaking the long-standing economic chains of serfdom. This demographic shock acted as a massive equalizer, shifting power from the landed elite to the working class for the first time in centuries. The church's inability to stop the dying also left a permanent mark. It undermined the idea of unquestioned religious dogma and began to change how people viewed institutional authority. European art became obsessed with mortality. The Danse Macabre, or Dance of Death, depicted skeletons leading both kings and peasants to the grave, emphasizing that the plague was no respecter of rank. This concept, known as memento mori, reminded survivors that death was always close, a theme that would deeply influence literature and philosophy for generations. Some adaptations were more practical. Cities began to develop the first public health quarantines and invested in better urban sanitation to prevent future outbreaks. The collapse of the old feudal order and the concentration of wealth among survivors helped create the economic conditions that would later support the growth of cities like Florence. The 14th century was a period of unimaginable loss, but that loss forced an era of adaptation. Out of the breakdown of the medieval system, survivors began to build the social, economic, and health-based structures that defined the centuries that followed.